The sky bled fire, and the gods delivered a feast. Out on the endless, cracked pan of the Emberstone Flats, hunger was a physical presence. It was a hollow ache in the bellies of the Anangu people, a shimmering haze in the air, a constant companion under the oppressive sun. For days, Kalen, a young hunter with eyes as sharp as his spear, had tracked a mob of kangaroos. With him were his two younger brothers, their faces smeared with dust, their hope wearing as thin as their worn leather sandals. Each time they crept close, a twig would snap, the wind would shift, and the kangaroos would bolt, leaving them with nothing but choking dust and the familiar pang of failure. Frustration was a bitter taste in Kalen's mouth. His people needed this meat. His family needed it. Then, at a shallow, murky watering hole, the kangaroos finally stopped. A collective, silent breath was held. This was their chance. Kalen signaled to his brothers. His movement slow, deliberate, a language of the hunt passed down through generations. They fanned out, sinking low into the sparse, spiny brush, every muscle coiled, ready to strike. But after only a few steps, a deep rumbling started, a vibration that seemed to come not from the ground, but from the very bones of the world. They looked up from their crouched position, their hunt forgotten. What was that? And then it happened. The world turned white, not just bright, but an impossible, silent, all-consuming whiteness that erased the sky, the ground, the horizon. It was a light with no source, a fire with no heat, and it swallowed every shadow. Kalen threw a hand over his eyes, a useless gesture against the sheer totality of it. In that silent, glaring moment, a blast of scorching wind erupted from nowhere. A physical fist that slammed into them, throwing the three brothers to the hard-baked earth like discarded dolls. Disoriented, their ears ringing in the sudden silence that followed, Kalen pushed himself up. He turned his head, his gaze sweeping towards the watering hole where the kangaroos had been. He saw them. He saw them floating, not hopping, not running, but suspended eerily in the air, limbs askew, as if gravity had momentarily forgotten them. They drifted towards him, a bizarre and horrifying procession, before dropping lifelessly to the ground, one by one. A feast, delivered at their feet. Un moment later, everything was normal again. The sky was its familiar piercing blue. The wind was just a hot breeze. The rumbling was gone. Except now, a dozen dead kangaroos lay in the dust before them. Malak, a hunter whose jealousy of Kalen was as sharp as his tongue, was the first to speak, his voice cutting through the stunned silence. "This is no gift, Kalen," he spat. His eyes narrowed with suspicion. "It is a curse." But hunger is a powerful god, and it drowns out the voice of caution. The tribe, drawn by the commotion, saw only the bounty. A miracle. Cheers erupted. That night, the Anangu tribe held a great celebration. Fires crackled, stories were told, and the scent of roasting kangaroo filled the air. It was a feast to honor the gods who had provided. A moment of profound relief and joy. Yet Kalen could not fully celebrate. As he prepared the meat, he noticed a strange, fine black dust clinging to the fur and flesh. It wasn't sand. It was finer, and it seemed to shimmer in the firelight with an unnatural sheen. A cold, heavy unease settled in his stomach, a feeling he couldn't name or explain. He watched his family, his people, eat the poison gift with gusto. And the knot of dread tightened. The next morning, the celebration turned to horror. It began with a single scream, then another, until the entire camp was a chorus of agony. People woke up violently ill, their bodies racked with a sickness none of the elders had ever seen. Vomiting, fevers, and then the rashes, angry red welts that bloomed across their skin. The gift was poison. The miracle was a plague. Moloch's words echoed in Kylan's mind. A prophecy fulfilled in the most horrific way. Some recovered over the next few days. Many did not. Kylan found his youngest brother lying in their shelter, his small body trembling, his skin hot to the touch. He knelt. That his heart, a cold stone in his chest. He held his brother's hand, a hand that had so recently held a boomerang with hopeful strength. His brother's eyes fluttered open, filled not with fear, but with a strange, tired confusion. Kylan, he whispered, his voice a dry rasp. The sky fire, it burns inside me. Kylan held him, rocking him gently as the last of his light faded from the world. He felt nothing but a vast, hollow emptiness where his grief should have been. He laid his brother down and walked out of the shelter, his gaze fixed on the scarred, distant horizon from where the impossible light had come. The emptiness inside him slowly, terribly, began to harden. It solidified from grief into something else, something cold and sharp. Unsolved. He would find the source of this sky fire. He would understand the nature of this curse. He would have an answer. While one family was torn apart by a gift from the sky, another was about to be shattered by a celebration they had meticulously planned themselves. A celebration of sorrow. Eleanor Vance raised her phone to capture a memory. Instead, she recorded her own final moments. The air in Harmony Creek, Ohio, was thick with the sweet smell of freshly cut grass and barbecue smoke. It was a perfect, idyllic Saturday in late October. The kind of day that feels like a warm, golden memory, even as it's happening. In the sprawling backyard, pastel balloons bobbed lazily in the breeze, and a banner proclaiming, "Boy or girl," hung between two oak trees. Laughter echoed across the lawn as friends and family mingled, their plates piled high with food, their faces beaming with anticipation. This was a celebration of new life. And at its center was Eleanor, the soon-to-be grandmother. Her heart so full, she felt it might burst. Her identity wasn't her job, or her hobbies. It was this, her family. And it was about to grow. But beneath the idyllic surface, a quiet tension hummed. Her son, Gary, was practically vibrating with a nervous, almost manic energy. He darted around, his smile a little too wide, his eyes constantly flicking towards his own father. A stern, silent man watching the proceedings from a patio chair with his arms tightly crossed. The older man's skepticism was a tangible force, a silent judgment on the whole affair. This modern spectacle of a gender reveal. As Gary passed his father's chair, the old man spoke without looking at him, his voice low and gravelly. "You sure that thing's not going to take out the neighbor's window, son?" Gary froze for a fraction of a second, the wide smile tightening at the edges. "It's perfectly safe, Dad," he said, forcing a cheerful laugh. "Just you watch. It's going to be great." This whole event, and especially its centerpiece, was Gary's desperate attempt to finally earn that nod of approval. that flicker of pride from the man who was so difficult to impress. The centerpiece was a so-called confetti cannon that Gary had built himself from a schematic he'd found online. It stood in the middle of the yard, a thick, metallic tube mounted on a wooden base, looking more like a piece of amateur artillery than a party favor. Eleanor, wanting a closer look at her son's handiwork, wandered over to it. It was heavier than she expected, crudely welded at the seams. As she ran her hand over the cool metal, her fingers brushed against something, a tiny, almost invisible line near the base, a hairline fracture. A prickle of unease ran up her spine. It was probably nothing, but a mother's worry is a persistent thing. A quiet alarm that most of the time proves to be false. But this felt different. A cold finger of genuine dread traced its way down her spine. She found her son by the grill. "Gary, are you sure this is safe?" she asked, her voice low. He laughed. A sound, a little too loud, a little too dismissive. He was brimming with a dangerous cocktail of pride and anxiety. "It's fine, Mom. It'll hold," he said, giving her a reassuring pat on the shoulder. "It's for the baby." And the words were meant to comfort, but they sent another chill through her. She let it go. It was his day, his moment. Who was she to cast a shadow on it? Finally, the time came. Gary clapped his hands, gathering everyone's attention. "Okay, everybody." Moment of truth. A ripple of excitement went through the crowd. Relatives backed away towards the fence line, pulling out their phones. Eleanor did the same, finding a good spot with a clear view. This was a pivotal moment in her family's history, and she would preserve it. She pressed the little red circle on her screen, the timer beginning to tick up through her final moments. Through the phone's lens, she framed the perfect shot. Gary and his pregnant wife, bathed in the golden afternoon light, standing proudly beside their creation. The world was a perfect 4-inch rectangle of pure joy. The crowd joined in as Gary began the countdown, his voice booming with excitement. 3, 2, 1. On the screen, Eleanor could see Gary's beaming face as he leaned forward and touched a lighter to the fuse. It sparked to life. He jumped back, threw an arm around his wife, and raised his other fist to the sky in a gesture of pure triumph. He opened his mouth and shouted, "It's a..." The rest of the word was swallowed by a deafening, metallic boom. That was nothing like the festive pop everyone expected. The image on Eleanor's phone screen violently dissolved into a chaotic blur of smoke and flying debris. For a split second, the world went black. Then the sound, a sickening, final thud as the phone clattered to the grass, its lens now pointing at an uncaring blue sky. But it was still recording. It recorded the sudden, terrified screams of the guests. And most clearly of all, it recorded the last sound Gary ever made as a carefree father-to-be. His triumphant shout, ripped apart and twisted into a raw, ragged scream of absolute, soul-shattering horror. An instrument of celebration had become a weapon. But sometimes, the most dangerous place isn't the real world at all, but the one designed to be perfectly safe. The Ghost in the Machine. On his last day before retirement, instructor Art Jenkins was about to teach his final, unscheduled lesson: how to die inside a place that doesn't technically exist. His student for the day was Dmitry Volkov, a former military pilot from Russia whose stoic demeanor seemed carved from granite bait. Dmitry's hands, resting lightly on the controls of the Cessna simulator, were steady and sure. He had flown everything from hulking transport planes to nimble helicopters, But this mid-tier private jet required a specific certification, and that certification ran through Art Jenkins and the state-of-the-art Aura Flight Aviation Center in Pinnacle, Nevada. She feels real, doesn't she? Art said. His voice, a cheerful, easygoing rumble that filled the small cockpit. After 30 years of this, he was more at home in this pod than in his own living room. The pod itself was a masterpiece of illusion. A big, white, circular machine perched on a complex hydraulic base that could mimic every shudder, lurch, and rumble of a real flight. Inside, the illusion was flawless. The wraparound screens displayed a perfect, sun-drenched replica of the airport outside, down to the shimmering heat haze rising from the tarmac. Dmitri didn't smile. He simply nodded, his eyes methodically scanning the array of instruments. "It is adequate," he said, his English precise and clipped. For him, this was not a game. It was a test of procedure and precision. As they ran through the mandatory pre-flight checklist, a tiny green dot blinked onto the edge of the virtual radar screen. It moved fast, cutting an impossible vector across the display before vanishing. Dmitri's eyes narrowed. He paused. "What is that?" he asked, pointing a single, steady finger at the screen. Art glanced over, saw nothing, and chuckled. It was his last day. The paperwork was already filed for his pension. His wife had a bottle of champagne chilling at home. He wasn't about to let a minor software bug derail the smoothest last day in aviation history. That. Just a ghost in the machine. "My friend," Art said with a wave of his hand. "This system's got more lines of code than a phone book. Sometimes a few of them get crossed. Don't you worry about it. Let's get you certified and get me retired." Dmitri's gaze lingered on the screen for a moment longer before he gave another curt nod. The pre-flight check was completed. With a button press from Art, the pod rumbled to life, the sound of the engines vibrating through their seats. It really did feel like they were in an actual plane. Dmitri released the brakes, and the virtual world began to glide past them. He taxied the simulated plane toward the runway, his movements economical and flawless. Once they were airborne, circling in the digital sky, Art could see that the test was a formality. Dmitri was a natural, his control of the craft intuitive and absolute. He was a true pilot, born for the sky, real or otherwise. The Cessna was a bit more sensitive than the larger aircrafts Dmitri was used to, but he adapted quickly, his hands making perfect adjustments. They ran through a series of drills, and Dmitri executed them all without a single flaw. "All right, Dmitri, you've more than passed," Art said, clapping him on the shoulder. "You fly that thing like you were born in it. Go ahead and bring her home. Let's practice the virtual landing." Dmitri banked the plane, lining it up perfectly with the runway shimmering in the distance. He was taking his time, his descent smooth and steady. Everything was going exactly right. The runway grew larger on the screens, the painted numbers becoming clear. It was a perfect approach, the perfect end to a perfect last day. And then the ghost came back. It wasn't a flicker this time. It was a solid, undeniable green dot, appearing on the edge of the radar, moving impossibly fast, on a direct collision course. Art's cheerful smile froze on his face. He blinked. It was still there, larger now, closer. His years of training screamed at him, but his brain couldn't reconcile it. This was a closed system, a simulation. There was nothing else in their digital sky. It was impossible. How could this be happening? Dmitri didn't need to see the radar. He saw the look on Art's face. He saw the blood drain from it. The cheerful mask of the seasoned instructor cracking to reveal the raw terror of a man who knew he was about to die. Dmitri followed his instructor's wide, disbelieving eyes to the screen. The blip was no longer a blip. It was a massive, undeniable object. A collision warning flashing in stark red letters. The wheels of the virtual Cessna kissed the virtual runway. The soft chirp of the tires was the last normal sound they would ever hear. Art opened his mouth to shout. To say what? He would never know. But his voice was lost in the deafening, unholy shriek of tearing metal as the entire flight simulator pod was violently, impossibly, thrown sideways. The world, both the one made of pixels and the one made of steel, exploded into a single, roaring inferno of fire and darkness. Look around you. At the mundane, the routine, the perfectly safe moments of your own life. The quiet commute, the family dinner, the daily tasks. We move through them with a sense of security, never truly considering the invisible forces at play. The sheer, dumb luck that separates a normal moment from a final one. After seeing how easily the thread of life can be cut by the scissors of irony, can you ever look at a simple coincidence the same way again?